This is the WGNS Action Line, talking with Rutherford County newsmakers about what matters most to you. Now, your host, Scott Walker.
This morning, we'll be talking a little bit about your health and maybe getting healthy with Kim Dunnaway from Sunshine Nutrition Center. How are you this morning?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. Tell us a little bit about your background, because I'm sure that's one of those things that listeners are curious about.
Sure. I mean, my family has owned Sunshine Nutrition since 1989. And a lot of people ask, why did they get into the business sort of in the first place? And my mother was in the medical field for a number of years as a registered nurse, and gradually over time just became a little disenchanted with the standard medical model. Not that it's not needed, and even now, of course, it's needed, but there's always been this prevention piece that's been missing, this root cause piece that's been missing a lot of times. And so with her own walk with health, was having a lot of issues with ulcers, and none of the ulcer medications at the time were working for her. And so someone told her to try papaya juice and aloe vera juice, and that worked. And it kind of opened up her mind to this whole different world that she wasn't really aware of. And they started to get into the use of alternative medicine and supplements and things like that. They considered opening their own store in Smyrna. We grew up in Laverne, and ultimately they ended up purchasing the store, Sunshine Nutrition, from the ownership at the time in 1989. So I grew up super weird, because while now you can go to Costco and Kroger and Walmart and buy organic things, you can buy healthier things, that was not the case in the late 80s and the 90s for quite some time. And so our bread always looked different. Our chips always looked different. The health foods that you had in the 90s were very different than the health foods do now. They actually make a cheese that melts, for instance, that's plant-based, and they actually make, whole grain breads and gluten-free breads that you don't have to, saw off, right? It's very, very different. And so I grew up differently. And then when I got to college, I thought, I've got all this freedom. I could eat M&Ms, I could eat Chips Ahoy and all these things. But ultimately, I just kind of ended up in the very same kind of crunchy, quote unquote, box. I remember this moment when I was training to be a teller at the time, and it was our last day of training before we went out to getting our own branches, and we were all eating lunch together. And when I looked up after we'd all gotten our food, everyone at the table had burgers and fries. I had tuna salad on wheat bread and a baked sweet potato. And that was like that moment that clicks in. It's like, no, I do think differently. Like, I grew up differently, and I treat things differently. And when I was working in banking, I was telling everybody what they needed to do for their allergies and their arthritis and things like that. And so ultimately, needless to say, I didn't pick the right career initially, and I ended up back here. And after a few years of running the business, I decided to go back to school, get a bachelor's degree in nutrition in an effort to become a dietitian. And then after that, I went and got a master's degree in nutrition as well. And so I have quite a different background than most dietitians, because I grew up kind of in alternative medicine, and then getting that medical component from dietetics. Now I have more of an integrative focus where I can sort of look at things from both sides and really sort of help people be able to find the path that works for them, that helps with long term, right? So much of this, not just a society in general, because we do have this very instant gratification, quick fix. How quickly can we make something work? Put a Band-Aid on me, stitch me up, send me back out, right? But that doesn't work in the long term. And then they get into their 50s and 60s, or in these days, 30s and 40s, a lot of times, when the body starts to fall apart, and they're like, what has gone wrong? What do I need to do differently? And so that's the piece that for me is so incredibly important, is taking the right supplements, eating the right foods, having the right lifestyle that help to prevent all of these diseases. And then if we do have a disorder, a disease, getting them as early as possible, and taking that really wide view lens of what's the right approach, medically, alternatively, complementary, to really give us the best results.
Over the years, health food has come a long way. I mean, when you're talking about the 80s and the 90s, you're talking about foods that didn't taste quite as good as they do. I mean, when you look at today's foods that are health foods, the quality, the difference is amazing. I mean, it really is, compared to the 80s and 90s.
No doubt about it. I mean, food scientists really, they get their money's worth, right? Like, the way that they make things taste, the textures, all of those things have improved drastically. And another thing that really has changed is, of course, in general, in the 80s and 90s, it was the low fat craze, right? Everything was low fat. They were making low fat Oreos and low fat vanilla wafers. There was this brand called Snackwells that was really popular at the time, if people remember that, because that was the model. And then they found it didn't prevent anything, right? In fact, in some cases, it made things worse because they would just replace those foods with sugar. And so that really wasn't the way. And so what we've seen a lot of times too is that, we've gone through a phase of low carb, we've gone through all these different phases. And so the foods oftentimes will reflect the phases as well, because growing up, everything was egg-free and cholesterol-free because that's what was going to kill you, right? It was avoid all of that at no cost. And of course, now that's vastly changed. And so that's also reflected not just in terms of the fact that the textures are better and the quality of the taste as better with health foods, but also because it's changed over the years as well, what's considered healthy.
It seems like one of the biggest news stories right now in the world of health and health foods and nutrition is the story about how in other countries like London and across the UK, in Japan and China, their foods do not contain the same dyes that our foods here have. They don't contain the same amount of sugar or the same kinds of sugar that our foods here have, even though they may be the exact same brand and they may taste pretty much the same. The ingredients are different.
It is very, very different. The portion sizes also are very different here than they are overseas. But it's true, you can't genetically modify foods in Europe. And they also have certain things that are banned there that are not banned here. The example that I like to use a lot of times is in terms of Prop 65, which is a law in California where they have to list what types of foods or ingredients have high levels of lead in them, right? So there's a number of foods that are on this list, and chocolate was one of the foods that was on this list, right? Well, Nestle and Hershey's, I think, spent like close to $1 billion, if not $1 billion, in lobbying the local political people in California so that chocolate would be exempt from that particular Prop 65 thing. And the interesting thing about that is a lot of times anything that's grown in the ground is going to have some trace amounts of lead. You would have to eat like a ridiculous amount of something in order for it to be problematic anyway. But it just goes to show you, if you have enough money, a lot of times, that you can get by with some of these things that aren't healthy, right? And that's a very, very unfortunate thing. And I think it's something that we would all like to see changed at some point sooner rather than later, where the public health takes the priority over financial benefits for whatever company it is at the time.
I didn't even know that I should have a fear of eating lead. I didn't know it was in some foods.
And that wasn't to scare you because, like there was a whole thing years ago about arsenic being in apple juice, right? Because again, it's a naturally occurring mineral that's going to be in the soil. The roots of the tree are going to pick it up and it's going to end up in the apple. You're not going to die of arsenic poisoning from eating apples or drinking apple juice. But it was kind of a scare tactic to use. And we've seen it a few different ways with protein powders and different things like that. And so that's where consumer education is really important, but it's also very, very difficult at times to educate the consumer. So a lot of times companies will find it easier to just either use fear tactics, to sort of our brand is better than theirs because, or to just take something out, take an ingredient out of their product altogether because of that. That's happened with soy a lot of times. Like soy was very tremendously popular in the 90s. Then it's had this kind of really big backlash. Now we've sort of seen that the backlash was really unwarranted, but a lot of companies found that it was just easier to make soy-free products than it was to try to educate the consumer that it was okay.
So why are there some of these dangerous ingredients, dangerous chemicals or metals? Why are these things found in foods here in America, but they're not found overseas?
It's part of the process to market, right? Like once something is on the market, sometimes it can be difficult to remove it, or there has to be a vast amount of evidence to prove that it needs to be removed from the market. So some of that is just the lack of testing, the lack of data available, things that are rushed to the market. It's kind of like a lot of things, honestly. I mean, for instance, cell phone use, are we going to know what it's like for everybody to be holding their cell phone for several hours of the day, for until 50 years from now? Probably not. And so that's sort of the case sometimes with some of these additives and things like that, is maybe we don't know the effects of them initially because you had a study that ran for a year or 2 years. And then now you're seeing that 10 years of consumption is a problem, right? Obviously, at that point, once you have more information, then you need to make the adjustments, more quickly differently than what we do, for sure. But that's part of the reason, is that the testing isn't always there. And if we use natural stuff, that's less of an issue, right? I mean, if we're using beet as a coloring agent instead of red number 3, we don't have that issue. But unfortunately, red number 3 is less expensive. So at the end of the day, a lot of times it comes right back down to the dollar and what's less expensive and what's more profitable for the company.
It sounds like some companies rush to get their food product out there, and then the public likes it, and then that food company is hesitant or scared to go and change whatever that one ingredient is that may prove to be unhealthy.
It's very expensive. It's very expensive to change your formulas. It's very expensive to change your labels and things like that. And so it's not something anybody wants to do unless they absolutely have to do it. And then you've got to pull from the market what's already out, right? Like product recalls are also very inefficient, because not the entire public doesn't find out about it. I mean, I know I saw a product recall one time at the bottom of my Kroger receipt. I don't pay attention to that most of the time, right? So there's not, again, like great ways to get that information out a lot of times.
Now, one of those things that is in some foods, a lot of candies and sodas, are the dyes that make it whatever color it is. And that's another item that I believe in some countries they don't allow for certain dyes. What is the deal with, like, for example, red dye? I hear that that's one that can potentially be dangerous.
So they've of course decided to outlaw red number 3. That was very recent, like in the last couple of weeks. My understanding was it hasn't been in the foods for some time, that particular dye, but red number 40 is the one that's most common. So there is of course a huge epidemic of like hyperactivity in this country, right? ADD, they continue to have more and more diagnosis of that. One of the alternative ways to treat that, treat's not the right word, to combat it, is the Feingold diet. And one of the things the Feingold diet does is it removes certain dyes from the food because it tends to increase behavioral problems. And that's a thing, right? And of course, a lot of the foods that kids eat have that dye in there, right? I mean, it's in gummy bears and candies, Kool-Aids, all kind of stuff, right? And it's definitely been correlated to behavior issues. Not good, right? And that's why we have problems here to a much higher degree than what they have in other countries where those types of things are not allowed, right? But trying to move the momentum out is very, very difficult because you have companies that are constantly fighting against it. But yes, they're not helpful and they don't add anything at all. It's not a flavor. It's literally just a color. It's kind of like Coke. Like people go nuts if you give them clear Coke because it's like it's weird. They want the brown Coke, but it's naturally clear. They add the caramel color to it to make it brown. And the caramel color itself is genetically modified. So if you want to have a non-genetically engineered soda, it's not going to have the brown color in it, right? Is it really worth that toxin, really, just to have brown Coke?
Yeah.
Right? Is it really worth the toxin just to have Skittles, right? You can get a natural alternative to that that's going to have dyes that are not artificial, that are not red number 40, yellow number 5, all of those things.
What are some of the problems you've seen over the years with children growing up eating some of these products?
The behavioral issues are definitely the most problematic, right? But you also have a lot of immune system issues. I mean, every year we see, the flu, RSV, just rampant a lot of times in the school systems because their immune systems are not very, very good because so much of our immune system is made up of our gut bacteria. And our gut bacteria really proliferates with a high fiber diet. For instance, a lot of the foods that kids eat, not high in fiber. Mac and cheese, there's no fiber in there unless you make it at home with like whole grain pasta, right? Chicken tenders, there's no fiber in that, right? Peanut butter and jelly on white bread, not a lot of fiber there, right? And so a lot of the foods that they're eating are not really helping to culture that good environment, and their immune systems are in the tank. Right? So we have immune system problems. We have a lot of behavioral issues, which can go back to the gut as well, because the gut makes a lot of neurotransmitters that help us to be able to focus. And so those are really two things that I see with the younger population that could really use a lot of improvement for sure. And that's a direct correlation with our diet.
I recently read an article talking about how doctors are seeing an increase in the number of patients who have constipation, an everyday problem. But is that something that is really occurring more often because of those foods we eat, because of a lack of fiber? I mean, is that really happening?
Yes, definitely. Lack of fiber, the choice of Beverage is also a big issue as well. Water, obviously very helpful. A lot of your caffeinated products, really not helpful. And there's just an over-reliance of caffeine in this country in general. People a lot of times will drink more ounces in soda, tea, and coffee than they will in water. And then a lot of the quick convenience foods, like 90% of grocery dollars. Let me say it again, 90% of grocery dollars is spent on ultra-processed foods. All of those things that are in those middle aisles, right? Unless we're talking about canned beans or, canned soups, most of those foods in those middle aisles, not real high on fiber. Like I had a guy in the hospital last week says he eats a little Debbie cake for breakfast. And he fought me tooth and nail, about trying to do something different. Oatmeal, anything, right? I mean, this, doing absolutely nothing for him, right? And so we get in this very, we're always on the go. What's the quickest thing? The quickest thing is not usually super health promoting. So yeah, we don't get nearly enough fiber. Women need 25 grams of fiber a day. Men need 38. Do you have any idea how much they average, Scott?
I have no clue.
Like 10. Like 10 grams is the average amount of fiber that people get per day, which is, anywhere from less than half to a third of their actual requirements, or sometimes about a quarter of their actual requirements for men. And that's just not effective. And of course it's leading to constipation problems, which in turn leads to an over-reliance on laxatives, because guess what? That's not getting to the root of the problem. If you go out and get Miralax to help you go every day, that's not fixing it. It's just a Band-Aid on the problem. And that's what I talk about with that integrative and functional lens, is really getting to the root of the problem. Why are the bowels not moving? Is it diet related? Is there something that you're taking that's causing the constipation, which can be an issue sometimes? Certain medications can lead to constipation, right? But what is causing it? And let's work on that instead of doing something that ultimately your body ends up getting a reliance on, that you end up having to take more of, that can cause your body to have other issues as well. Let's get to the root of the problem. And sometimes, with the constipation issue, there's a great debate about how often a person should go, right? There's some medical providers who feel like if you go once every other day, that's fine. If you eat once every other day, that's fine. If you eat more often than that, that is not fine. Think about a baby. Think about dogs, right? Meal in, meal out. That's ideal. You've got to be going at least once a day. Anything less than that, you're absolutely constipated.
Another thing you hear often from people is that boys and girls are developing a lot quicker, and it's probably because of hormones that are in different foods. Is there truth to that?
It's debated, because in order for instance, for you to get some milk or a thing of chicken, and it says on there not made with recombinant bovine growth hormones on there, RGBH, it has to have also a disclaimer that it hasn't been proven to be an issue, right? There's obviously a correlation somewhere. If you're giving a chicken, a cow, what have you, ways to make them bigger, there's no way that doesn't impact the products that they produce later on. There's just absolutely no way, right? And so, of course, that is an issue. Food choice makes a tremendous difference, right? If you look at a grass-fed cow versus a corn-fed cow, they're very, very different looking, because the corn-fed cow is going to be fat, right? The grass-fed cow is going to be lean. I mean, the diet makes a difference in the cattle, and that makes a difference when it lands on our plate, right? And so, yes, it absolutely is a factor, but they haven't really been able to get a smoking gun evidence to say, stop putting hormones in the products, right? Stop putting hormones in the poultry and stop putting hormones in the cattle so that we don't have these problems. But of course, it's a factor. Is it the only factor? It's probably a multitude of things, right? It comes down to, diet and portion size. If we're doing a 4-ounce beef patty twice a week, is that a big deal? Probably not. But if we're doing an 8-ounce beef every single day with that same type of thing, of course it's going to make a difference. So how much that we're doing of those things also matters.
Are people eating too much steak, too much, pork chops? Are they eating too much meat?
Most of the time, yes. The portion sizes are too big. Like, I tell people all the time that, your, porterhouse steak is probably 2 portions. And people look at me like I just told them that, they're green and they have yellow freckles, right? That's a totally foreign concept to them. But your body's only going to absorb so much protein at a time. And whatever you eat over that amount is either got to be wasted, so your kidneys have got to work to waste it, or it's going to be stored. That's it. Those are the only options. You've either got to waste it or store it. So if your body's only going to absorb maybe 40 grams of protein at a time, that's 6 ounces of meat, right? So a porterhouse, a big thick ribeye is over those portions. So yes, in general, we tend to eat too much of those things. And so people always say, I don't get enough protein. Most of the time people do get enough protein. They just get too much of everything, right? Where I emphasize protein intake is when people are trying to lose weight, because if we're trying to maximize the amount of calories that we eat, we want to make sure we're getting enough protein. And for my older adults who tend to lose muscle, and that tends to lead to falling and some other issues, and they tend to eat less because their appetite is lower. So they need to emphasize protein. But honestly, for most of us, protein intake is not an issue. It's a lot of other things, that we're just eating too much of, and protein tends to be one of those things.
Can our body break down these steaks that we're eating? I mean, let's say you go to the restaurant and you get some huge 20-ounce steak. Is our body able to safely break that meat down?
If you have good functioning kidneys, yes. A lot of people in this country have chronic kidney disease. It's a silent disorder. It doesn't have symptoms. You get your blood work back and you see that it says CKD stage 3A. You have no idea a lot of times what that means until you're in stage 4 and they send you to a nephrologist. And at that point, your kidneys are heavily impacted at that point. If you have high blood pressure and if you have diabetes, you are at risk for chronic kidney disease. Chronic kidney disease leads to kidney failure, which ultimately leads to either dialysis or you die. I mean, that's it. And so, yes, if you are in one of those states, then doing a 20-ounce steak, real big problem, because your kidneys are already not functioning at a high enough capacity to be able to deal with that. One of the ways that you combat chronic kidney disease is a lower protein diet. So if you're healthy and your GFR is over 90, right, which a lot of people are when they're under 40 and they don't have some of those conditions, fine. If you want to eat your 20-ounce steak, I don't recommend it, but go for it, right? But if you're somebody with a compromised kidneys, that's a real bad decision, honestly.
So part of this preventative health and being healthy is not only the foods that we eat every day, but also in taking supplements, because it sounds like we also don't get enough of the right ingredients to begin with.
Right. I mean, it's food first is always the best way, right? Getting your omega-3s from your fish, your walnuts, your chia seeds, your flax seeds is ideal. But most people, they're going to eat their fish deep fried, or they're not going to eat some of those things that I mentioned. So they need a fish oil supplement or a flax oil supplement. They need some way to get omega-3, right? We get our vitamin Bs from our whole grains, from beans. But if we eat those things, then we might need a multivitamin that has it in there, right? So a lot of the things I look at is, what does a person's diet look like? And that sort of shows us what type of supplements that person need. What type of disorders does that person have? That can show us what type of supplements they need. What are their goals, right? That can show us what type of supplements that a person needs. And so I don't like for people to go into supplements thinking that it's a replacement for good decisions, right? Because people try to do that at times. I'm not going to eat greens. Give me a green powder, right? Okay. If that's the best we can do, yes, but I still want you to eat greens, right? I still want you to eat some vegetables. Like, we still need to eat these things. It's not designed to be a replacement. That's why they're called a supplement. They're designed to sort of enhance what we're already doing, right? But if you're not going to eat any greens, I'd rather you do a green powder than nothing at all, right? I mean, it's sort of that priority level. Ideally, we're eating all the vegetables that we need. In the next case that we're not, let's at least get some nutrients that we're not getting. Right. And so that's tremendously important that we sort of look at our diet and sort of figure out where those holes are. And that's what I do, what my staff, is trained to do, and sort of help us to sort of fill in those gaps.
I know we mentioned, hormones in certain foods and kids developing quicker than they did 30, 40, 50 years ago. But what about our hormones being out of whack? Because it seems like more and more today, people are being prescribed things like testosterone on a regular basis. So how have our hormones gotten so far out of whack, and what can people do to bring them back into play where they should be?
I mean, two things. One is the food, and two is stress. Those are the two things that are the biggest factor on your hormones. I mean, Super Size Me is always going to stick with me, right? That documentary that was done and, 2000, somewhere in that time frame, where the guy ate McDonald's 3 times a day, for 30 days. And look, McDonald's is still in business, right? It didn't put him out of business, but his testosterone levels were lower. That was one of the many things that went wrong over the course of the month. And so, yes, I have seen a trend since we have been in this business now for 35 years of the customer who is looking for a testosterone supplement get younger and younger and younger, right? It used to only be in the over 60 crowd. And now I see it, in people in their 30s, early 30s where it's an issue, right? And it's kind of scary because honestly, the where supplements get a bad rep is in those companies that are not testing their products. They're just kind of throwing things. And the category that is the most susceptible to that are aids for testosterone and sexual enhancement. Those sports aids, weight loss, those are the three categories where they get the most issue with supplements. And so here with testosterone, very much so, it's a very, very popular category. But if you don't buy the right products, you could be in trouble, right? You're doing things that are potentially contaminated and have things in there that don't need to be in there, or things that say they're in there and they're not in there, right? Or they're not in there in the amounts that are on the bottle. So it's very, very important, if that's something that you're struggling with, that you get a good, reputable brand, because that particular category is very susceptible to contamination in poor products, right? But that is why the diet, because I work in multiple different settings, I work with a lot of single men a lot of time, and their diet is ramen noodles, microwavable meals, because it's easy. That's what they do, right? And there's not a lot of nutrition in those kind of things. In fact, there's zero nutrition in ramen noodles. It's probably the opposite because of all the sodium that's in there, but it's cheap and it's easy, right? So, but you combine those kind of diets, or the McDonald's diet, or the Burger King, or whatever your fast food chain of choice is, of course it's going to affect the hormones. Of course it's going to affect the hormones. And the other one is stress, right? Like, I listened to The Anxious Generation last year, which was one of the most popular books of the year. It was a nonfiction book about the effect of social media on this younger generation. The Snapchats, the TikToks, the Instagrams, and all those different types of things. The stress levels for the younger crowd due to those types of things, way, way higher than it was when we were coming up. We didn't have those things, right? That we were comparing ourselves to other people constantly throughout the day. And that stress also we see in the adult population as well too, largely due to those types of things. And stress wreaks havoc on the body in so many different ways, the immune system, the hormonal system. And so that's really what leads to, those hormonal issues that you just asked about, the diet and stress.
It's interesting because, gosh, when you talk about stress, it does seem like everybody today has some level of new stress going on. They have increased anxiety compared to even 10 years ago. But the levels are crazy right now.
It is. And COVID really exacerbated it quite a bit. People that were at home with their spouse for the first time, and, the divorce rate went up, right? People's stress and anxiety were definitely really high in that particular point. And they haven't really gone down now that we're kind of out of that. And, election years also tend to bring up a lot of stress in people, a lot of times pretty unnecessarily, a lot of catastrophizing and things like that go on. And so, yes, it is. The stress just continues to creep up, and people do less and less about it. There has been, in general, in the last few years, a great emphasis on mental health that we haven't seen in a really long time, right? And I think that ultimately we're moving in the right direction. The progress is very, very slow, right? A lot of people, might need a supplement for stress. A lot of people might need a therapist for stress, right? Some people might need an environment change, a job change, a lot of different things, and so we have to do a better job of managing our stress. But a lot of times it might mean that we have to make decisions that put us in a position to be able to endure less stress. Honestly, the body is designed to deal with stress. Like it's intelligently designed. We have mechanisms in the body to deal with stress. The problem becomes with prolonged stress over long periods of time. And because their body is dealing with it, then a person thinks, I don't need to do anything about it. Fine, right? And it's kind of one of those silent things, because it doesn't you don't wake up one morning and become stressed out. You don't go from a 0 to 10 without some kind of major stressful event. Most of the time, it's this kind of slow tick, that's hard to measure, until one day you're like, I'm not acting like I used to act. I'm not sleeping like I used to sleep. But it was kind of a slow process to get there. And then they don't know what they did to get there. And they don't know how to get out of it.
Again, Kim Dunnaway with us this morning from Sunshine Nutrition Center. We're going to take a short break, and then we will come right back. Time right now, 8:48. Stay with us. Again, we do have more news and information coming up.
The Action Line on FM 101.9 and AM 1450 Murfreesboro, FM 100.5 Smyrna. Listen and watch at WGNSradio.com.
When I eat healthy, I can eat at Demas's. When I want to eat unhealthy, I can eat at Demas's. If I'm in the mood for pasta, I go to Demas's. If I want steak, I go there. It does not matter what I'm in the mood for. This is Peter Demas. The only thing we don't have is fried food. So it's very easy when you want to take a group out and there's that veto power person who's like, I don't want this. Well, we usually will have something that they want because we have such variety on our menu. The only thing we don't have is fried food. Demas's Restaurant on Northwest Broad Street.
I am Charlotte Gardner. I've lived at Adams Place for 3 years. After my husband died, I didn't want to cook for one anymore. Everything just got too tedious.
How long did you look around?
I did not look around. I did not even consider any place else.
Hi, this is Terry Deal at Adams Place. Call me for more information about Adams Place. Phone 615-904-9111.
Adams Place on Memorial across from Walmart.
Get old. Old National Bank, that is. Old National Bank has the experience and service you need to buy a home, make investments, even online and mobile banking. Old National Bank is in the borough on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard.
Old National Bank at 2230 Dr. MLK Jr. Boulevard, which used to be Mercury Boulevard.
Visit us and enjoy warm, homemade cookies at Old National Bank.
Old National Bank, equal housing lender, member FDIC.
The Action Line on FM 101.9 and AM 1450 Murfreesboro, FM 100.5 Smyrna. Listen and watch at WGNSradio.com.
Kim Dunnaway is with us this morning in studio from Sunshine Nutrition Center. So if somebody is constantly feeling just worn out and run down, tired each and every day, just ongoing fatigue, what are some of the things that we can do to change that?
Usually a good multivitamin is a good place to start. And when I say good multivitamin, I don't mean like the minimum it is to get by, because when you get like a Centrum Silver, One a Day, those type of brands, they just have little amounts of everything, and there's probably not enough in there for you to get any kind of a boost. But if you get a good high potency multivitamin that's got higher amounts of the Bs in there, for instance, higher amounts of some of those minerals that you might be missing, then you're much more likely to feel a difference within 30 minutes to an hour of taking that product. And for a lot of people, that's a really good place to start. A lot of times people will try, they'll try B vitamin, they'll try a ginseng product, they'll try this and that. And a lot of times a good place to start is just a good high potency multi to start with, right? The next thing I'm going to look at is some of those things in their diet. Is there an over-reliance of caffeine? If so, they might benefit from taking some type of an adrenal supplement. And what that does is that's going to help the body be able to respond better to stress. It's going to give them a little bit of energy by helping that gland that helps so much with your energy and stress levels. And so a lot of times a multivitamin alone may not be enough. They might need that additional adrenal product if they have been under stress for long periods of time, if they are a woman that's going through menopause, or if they are a man that is struggling with testosterone issues as well. They would probably benefit from some type of an adrenal support in addition to that. So that's really what I'm going to look at supplementally, and also a few of those diet tweaks. Look at the caffeine intake and look at breakfast. A lot of people that complain about energy skip breakfast. Either don't have time, they say they're not hungry, what have you. And then of course they're tired. They have nothing to run on. Or if they do eat something, it's like a bagel or a donut. And of course that's not going to give you long sustained energy like it would be if you got a decent amount of protein at breakfast, right? So those are the things I'm going to look at.
When we're younger, in college, we can live on ramen noodle fairly well and get along. But once we hit those ages of 30, 40, 50 years old, if that's what we're living off of, that's going to cause real problems. And I'm curious, will we notice a massive change in the way we feel and our energy levels if we start eating healthy?
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the signposts of aging, right? Like the pizza diet is no longer serving you, right? It's not just you got out of bed and you felt that little crick in the back. It's also like, the diet, obviously something needs to change. And so as early as we can, making those types of adjustments. And it doesn't mean that we have to go from one end of the spectrum all the way to the other. Like when I ask people, what does it look like to eat healthy? The first thing they say, salad. as if that's the only healthy thing to eat, right? It's like, okay, you like pizza. Okay, let's work with pizza. What can we put on the pizza that makes it healthier? Can we get a frozen pizza that's healthier than going and getting, meat lovers, right? Like you can have pizza that can be fairly healthy. I mean, you get, starch, right, from the crust. You've got, some kind of vegetables from the sauce and what vegetables you might put on it, and you're getting some protein from the cheese. It's not a terrible thing. The problem is the toppings that we put on it, and the problem is the amount of it that we consume, right? So I can work with a lot of things. It's hard to work with ramen noodles because they have so much sodium, right? But perhaps if we use half the packet of seasoning, we can make a little bit of progress there with the sodium. If we add, I've had people that will add chicken to their ramen noodles, like some grilled chicken to their ramen noodles. Hey, now we got some protein, So I can work with a lot of different things. It doesn't mean that we have to go from one end of the spectrum to drinking, carrot juice, right? There's so much in between, we can do cooked vegetables, we can do beans. Like there's a lot of things that we can do that we can just make a little bit of progress. So for me, it's like, okay, I'm not going to go from somebody who ate McDonald's 3 times a day to eating at home 3 meals a day with 5 to 10 servings of vegetables. That would be great, but no, most people are not going to do that. They're just not, right? So my goal might be, we're going to go from eating out 3 meals a day to eating out 2 meals a day. And that's a movement in the right direction. The body's going to benefit from that 1 meal a day that you're eating at home, right? And that's the way that I want people to approach getting healthier. It doesn't have to be this massive change. Like we're here. Somebody told me just yesterday that they have like a name now for January 31st. Quitter's Day, I think is what they called it. It's like the day that most people just give up on their New Year's resolutions, right? Because they came up with these ridiculously over the top, never going to stick to. But instead, if you were like, you know what, I'm going to do one healthy thing this week. We talked about that early in the month, right? Then you could move the needle, right? So let's just focus on that, right? If your diet right now is ramen noodles and microwavable meals, pick the meal that would be the easiest for you to do something different and make a change there.
I know we only have like 3.5 minutes left, but if we make this change and we start eating healthier, we start eating 3 meals a day, how long does it take to start feeling better?
Dietary changes work faster than anything. They work faster than a lot of supplements are going to work at times. Some supplements work really fast, right? Like some for stress are designed to work like immediately. But, something like a multivitamin, a joint supplement, those might take some time to sort of kick in. Dietary changes can kick in almost immediately because you can tell a difference between a good breakfast and a bad breakfast that day, right? You can tell a difference from a good dinner and a not good dinner that day, right? And so those are things that you can see immediately, which hopefully helps with compliance and long-term success.
So we could feel better within a few days even.
Yes, you can.
Yes.
And you
great.
will. And you will. Do it. Just do it.
Start eating healthier. Sunshine Nutrition Center, how do we find you?
So we have 2 locations. I'm at the Murfreesboro location here at 621 at South Church Street. And then in Smyrna, we have a second location, a little bit smaller, but packs mighty. I have a great staff down there, and that's at 901 Rock Springs Road, right at the corner of Old Nashville Highway in Rock Springs.
So adding a supplement to our daily life, let's say somebody who's in their 40s, 50s, 60s, is it very expensive to start getting healthier? I mean, when you talk about adding supplements into your diet?
I mean, fish oil is pretty inexpensive. That's usually a lot of times the first thing that I'll start with people because that's something that has so many good benefits. It's not very inexpensive and it's something that's really lacking in a lot of people's diet. I think if you start there in a probiotic, pretty inexpensive. You can save 25% off on Tuesdays at Sunshine, right? But wherever you get it at, those are 2 good places to start. If you just don't get a coffee every day at Starbucks, you've already paid for it.
Yeah. And then as far as eating healthier foods, I guess that's just a matter of steering clear of some of those sugary foods and high salt foods.
It's unfortunate that the really cheap foods are so unhealthy, right? And so people always complain that it's healthy, it's more expensive to eat healthier. But if you cook those meals at home, if you're smart about the things that you use plant-based, for some meals instead of a meat all the time, you'll find that it's actually just as cost effective to eat healthier. It's just all in the food selection. And
should we focus more on things like chicken and fish over pork and beef?
I'm not mad at oink and moo, right? Like it's okay. It's the cuts of meat that we choose, right? Sirloin cuts, filet cuts are going to be better than ground chucks and those types of things. Your pork loins, your pork chops are going to be better choices than your pork bellies and those types of things. So just make better choices, but there's good choices in all of those categories.
Just eat less of it.
That too.
Again, Kim Dunnaway with us this morning from Sunshine Nutrition Center in both Murfreesboro and Smyrna. Well, Kim, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're broadcasting from the Middle Tennessee Electric Studios. Middle Tennessee Electric, serving to make life better since 1936.
The Action Line on FM 101.9 and AM 1450 Murfreesboro, FM 100.5 Smyrna. Listen and watch at WGNSradio.com.